The hidden legacy. Success leaves clues. But instead of following these clues, most people chase the wrong maps. Today, we are opening the real roadmap of one of the greatest wealth architects in human history, Andrew Carnegie. Let's go back to the year 1901. When J.P. Morgan shook Carnegie's hand, he told him, "Congratulations, Mr. Carnegie. You are now the richest man in the world." That day, Carnegie sold his company for a price exceeding $400 billion in today's money. This figure was equivalent to 2% of the American economy at that time. The wealth of a single man was 2% of an entire nation's economy. If you convert this to today's terms, it means a fortune of $800 billion. However, for Carnegie, wealth was not an end, but a byproduct. He had built a system, and this system turned everyone who passed through it into gold. When he set foot in America as a Scottish immigrant, he didn't have a single penny in his pocket. He was 13 years old and stepped into the dirty streets of Pittsburgh as his family's only hope. He knew what hunger, damp rooms, and despair meant. His entire family lived together in a one-room apartment. His father was trying to work at a loom at home, ashamed of his old profession, but could not find a buyer. Now machines were producing products much faster and cheaper than humans. So how did a telegraph messenger become the steel king of the world? How did a 13-year-old boy in a cotton factory become the most powerful man in America 40 years later? What was the original source of that 20-year research that led Napoleon Hill to write Think and Grow Rich? Carnegie told Hill, "I have no secrets. However, there are principles of success, and these principles are universal. Go and find them." In this video, we will examine Carnegie's life not just as a biography, but as the steel laws that will enable you to become a titan of the modern age. These laws are principles that crystallized, hardened, and became perfect in Carnegie's 75-year life. They are powers that shaped not only the success of one man, but the economic structure of an era. If you take 20 minutes to enter this archive, you will discover that money is not just a piece of paper, but a mental discipline. You will see that wealth is not a matter of luck, but an algorithm that follows certain patterns. Fasten your seatbelts, because this road from poverty to empire will be much tougher, more ruthless, and at the same time more inspiring than you think. The first law: hunger for knowledge and observation. Everything started in the town of Dunfermline, Scotland. Carnegie's father, William, was a master weaver and a very good one too. However, the Industrial Revolution took his job away. Machines came and changed everything. His father became more withdrawn every day, while his mother, Margaret, tried to keep the family afloat by doing sewing work. As Carnegie watched his father put his head between his hands in despair, he made a vow. "I will never be at the mercy of anyone again. I will never fall behind technology again." When they came to Pittsburgh, America, Carnegie started working in a cotton factory operating a machine. His weekly earning was only $1.20. For a 13-year-old boy, this was a massive responsibility. He worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. However, he didn't spend his time only at the machine. He observed the world around him. He noted how the factory owner took orders, which customers paid more, and at what hour the machines broke down. He made his first big discovery there. Wealth comes not from muscle power, but from the flow of information. When he entered a telegraph company as a messenger, he experienced the turning point of his life. At that time, the telegraph was the pioneer of the internet. The pulse of the entire business world passed through telegraph wires. Carnegie was carrying and reading the messages of all the businessmen in the city. Who owes whom? Where the railroad extends? Which mines are gaining value? Which companies are merging? Which banks are on the verge of bankruptcy? In an age without Google, Carnegie engraved all the data of the city into his head. But he didn't just stop at reading. He learned Morse code and became one of the few people in the world who recognized telegraph messages by their sound. This gave him a huge advantage: speed and accuracy. When messages arrived, he could deliver much faster than other messengers because he didn't need to decode the message. He knew what was written when he heard the sound. One day, an urgent message came from his boss, Thomas Scott. Scott was the manager of the Western Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, and there had been a critical train accident. The line was blocked, all traffic had stopped, and Scott could not be reached. Carnegie was 17 years old and faced a giant responsibility. He could have waited, he could have done nothing, but he took all the responsibility and sent orders to the trains by forging Scott's signature. He cleared the line, restarted the traffic, and saved the company from thousands of dollars in losses. When Scott returned, he found out what Carnegie had done. He could have fired him. He could have even had him imprisoned. But Scott saw Carnegie's intelligence. This boy was not just someone who took orders. He understood the system and could make decisions by taking risks. Scott took him under his wing and made him his assistant. This was the first major jump in Carnegie's career. And this jump happened thanks to his hunger for knowledge and observation skills. At that time, thousands of young men were working in the same telegraph company in Pittsburgh. But how many of them practiced for hours at home to learn Morse code? How many of them took notes on the conversations of businessmen every day? How many of them took responsibility by taking risks in a moment of crisis? Lesson 1. If you want to get rich, don't just take a salary from where you work. Use it like a university. Knowledge is more valuable than capital because right knowledge pulls capital to itself like a magnet. Carnegie's first investment was in knowledge, not money. Those hours he spent learning Morse code earned him millions. Whatever your current position is, there is something to be learned there. Learn that thing and become its master. The second law, vertical integration and siege. In the 1870s, America was being built rapidly. Railroads split the continent in two. Skyscrapers began to rise into the sky. And the foundation of all these was built on one thing: steel. Steel was the technology of that era. It was like the chip of Silicon Valley, the oil of the automotive revolution. However, everyone was producing steel. There were hundreds of companies in the market and competition was high. What separated Carnegie from the others? He followed a siege strategy, similar to what his rival Rockefeller did in the oil world. We call this vertical integration in the business world. This word might sound complex to you, but the concept is very simple. Control every link of your supply chain. Carnegie did not buy raw materials from outside like his competitors. His rivals were buying iron ore from the iron mines in Minnesota. Carnegie asked, "Why should I pay a profit share to the mine owner?" And he bought all the Minnesota iron mines. Now he controlled the iron source. Then he looked at the transportation problem. His rivals were paying high fees to train and ship companies to transport the ore from the mines to the factories. Carnegie said, "Why should I give money to the shipping company?" and built his own railroads, built his own ships. On the Great Lakes, Carnegie ships and trains were carrying, and he was no longer paying commission to any middleman. But he didn't stop there. Coking coal was needed to produce steel. His rivals were buying this coal. Carnegie bought the coal mines too. Water was needed to cool the steel mills. Carnegie also bought the lands on the river banks. He controlled every stage from the moment the steel came out of the ground until it became a beam of a skyscraper. Thanks to this, while his rivals produced 1 ton of steel for $100, Carnegie could produce it for $20. This difference destroyed his rivals. He drove prices so low that his rivals came to his door one by one and surrendered. Carnegie bought their companies and grew even more. In the 1890s, Carnegie Steel Company was performing nearly half of America's total steel production alone. How? Because no one could go below his costs. He had written the rules of the game. However, he was a very tough leader in this process. What happened in the Homestead Strike of 1892 showed the whole world how cold-blooded he could be while building this empire. The workers wanted wage increases and better working conditions. Carnegie did not approach the negotiation. The result? A bloody conflict, deaths, and a national scandal. Carnegie's image in the public eye was shaken, but his empire was not. He believed that money was not a matter of emotion, but a matter of efficiency. He measured the performance of every worker in his factories, rewarded the most efficient ones, and fired the inefficient ones. This was a ruthless system, but it was an extremely effective system. One of Carnegie's rivals was Henry Clay Frick, one of the richest men of that era. Frick was the king of coking coal. Instead of defeating Frick, Carnegie partnered with him, because Frick was much better than Carnegie at coal. Carnegie's genius lay here. Instead of destroying rivals, he became stronger by including them in the system. Lesson 2. Don't just sell a product. Try to control the entire ecosystem of that product. When you eliminate the middlemen, you become the absolute owner of the market. Amazon follows the same strategy today. It doesn't just sell products. It controls logistics, controls the cloud system, controls advertising. Tesla doesn't just produce cars, it produces batteries, sets up charging stations, writes the software. If you want absolute dominance in a sector, control your supply chain. What middlemen are in your sector? Can you eliminate them? The third law, the mastermind. Carnegie often said, "Write this on my gravestone, here lies a man who knew how to collect people smarter than himself around him." This was the greatest praise possible for a leader, because Carnegie was also smart enough to know that he couldn't do everything alone. This is the mastermind concept he taught to Napoleon Hill. Carnegie understood this. No matter how smart a person is, the capacity of their brain is limited. But if you put two smart people side by side, the synergistic power that emerges is much more than the sum of the two. If there are 3 people, this power increases exponentially. Carnegie made more than 40 people working with him millionaires. Being a millionaire in the early 1900s was equivalent to today's billionaires. Why? Because he knew that if he made his team rich, his team would make him the richest man in the world. By sharing 1% of his own wealth, he ensured it grew 1,000%. His right hand, Charles M. Schwab, received a salary of $1 million a year. This was an astronomical figure for that time. The president's salary was $50,000 a year. Schwab was earning 20 times more than the president. So why was Carnegie paying him this much? Schwab's specialty was not that he understood steel very well. Carnegie had engineers who knew metallurgy better than Schwab. Schwab's real talent was something else. He knew how to manage people and make them work with the highest efficiency. When Schwab went to a factory, he could raise the morale of the workers, motivate them, and ensure record production. Carnegie paid him a fortune for this talent of Schwab's, because Carnegie knew that even the best machine is useless if the people using it are not motivated. Schwab was the soul of Carnegie Steel Company, and Carnegie knew his value. Carnegie was also a talent scout. He would find young talents, give them great responsibilities, and make them partners. He could put a 20-year-old engineer in charge of his factory. This was something extraordinary for that period, but Carnegie was looking at talent, not age. His other partner was Henry Phipps. Phipps was his childhood friend and a genius of accounting. Carnegie was not very good with numbers, but Phipps knew where every penny went. Carnegie and Phipps formed a perfect duo. One vision, the other execution. Carnegie would hold meetings with his management team every week. In these meetings, everyone could express their opinion freely. They could even oppose Carnegie. Carnegie did not surround himself with yes men. He wanted people who challenged him, who thought differently, because he knew that real progress is born from conflicts of ideas. One day, Carnegie met an engineer in one of his factories. The engineer offered an improvement suggestion in the production process. Carnegie listened to the suggestion and ordered it to be implemented immediately. That engineer was promoted within a month and joined Carnegie's inner circle. Carnegie valued good ideas and good people. Lesson 3. You cannot reach the top alone. Benefit from the intelligence and energy of the people around you. Be fair and make them rich too. This will return to you tenfold. Next to Steve Jobs was Steve Wozniak. Next to Bill Gates was Paul Allen. Behind every successful leader, there is a strong team. Who is your team? How do you motivate them? Do you make them rich, or do you just use them? Carnegie's formula was simple. Create partners, not employees. The fourth law, wealth ethics and legacy. At the beginning of the video, I said that Carnegie sold his fortune for $480 million. That day was March 12th, 1901. Carnegie was 65 years old and quite tired. He had spent 50 years of his life in steel mills. Now he wanted to do something different. J.P. Morgan made him an offer. I want to buy your company. Carnegie said a figure, $480 million. Morgan wrote the check. So how did he spend the last 20 years of his life? This is where he turned from a titan into a legend. Carnegie wrote an essay called The Gospel of Wealth. This essay was published in 1889 and shook the world. He built a single sentence there. The man who dies rich dies disgraced. This sentence destroyed all the understanding of wealth that prevailed until that time, because until then, the rich would accumulate their fortunes and leave them to their children. Carnegie, on the other hand, said, "A person who dies without giving his wealth back to society has failed." This was a radical thought. Carnegie started the greatest philanthropy movement in human history. He donated 90% of his fortune to charities. He distributed a total of $350 million. In today's money, this is a figure over $5 billion. He had more than 3,000 libraries built all over the world. Why libraries? Because he knew how difficult it was to access books as a poor child. In Pittsburgh, a businessman named Colonel James Anderson would open his library at home to poor children every Saturday. Carnegie would go there every Saturday and read books for hours. That library had changed his life. Carnegie was saying, "Colonel Anderson opened a library for me, and I will open 3,000 libraries for the world." And so he did. Every small town in America has a Carnegie Library. These libraries contributed to the education of millions of children. Instead of giving people fish, Carnegie built buildings that would teach them how to catch fish. Not only libraries, he founded universities. Carnegie Mellon University is today one of the most prestigious technology universities in the world. Carnegie Hall, on the other hand, is New York's most famous concert hall. Instead of accumulating his wealth and taking it to the grave, he left an intellectual legacy that would make his name live forever. Today, when you hear Carnegie's name, what comes to your mind? Steel? No. Libraries, universities, and philanthropy come to mind. Carnegie did not have a son. He could have left his fortune to his daughter, but he made a different choice. He left his fortune to humanity. And in this way, he ensured that his name is mentioned even 200 years later. How many rich men's names do we remember? But everyone knows Carnegie. Carnegie also worked for world peace. Before the First World War, he showed diplomatic efforts to prevent the war. He built peace palaces, established international courts. Even though he could not prevent the war, he laid the foundations of today's United Nations structure. Lesson 4. Real wealth is not how much fortune you accumulate, but how much value you create. Investing it in the development of society after earning money is the last and greatest move of a titan. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are following this path of Carnegie. They promised to donate most of their fortunes. Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan are doing the same. Why? Because they understood that real success is the legacy that keeps you alive even after death. What will be your legacy? What will people think when they hear your name 50 years later? Final. The key to the archive is with you. Andrew Carnegie died on August 11, 1919, in his summer house in Massachusetts. He was 83 years old. He had a few $1,000s in his pocket. All his fortune was gone. However, he had left a massive legacy to the world. Carnegie's story is not just a fairy tale belonging to the past. This is a universal algorithm that is also valid in today's world. Hunger for knowledge, system-building skills, the art of working with the right people, and the obligation to give back to society. These 4 laws work in every age, everywhere. The first law, hunger for knowledge and observation, is even more important today, because now knowledge is a click away. Carnegie worked in a telegraph company to reach knowledge. You, on the other hand, can access all the world's knowledge from your phone. The question is, are you using this knowledge or just consuming it? Carnegie would memorize the messages. You, how many of them do you take notes on? The second law, vertical integration, can be applied in every sector today. If you are a content creator, don't just produce content. Control the distribution channels too. If you are a software developer, don't just write code. Manage customer relations, sales processes too. Eliminate the middlemen and be the owner of the system. The third law, the Mastermind, is perhaps the most important one, because no one can reach the top alone. Carnegie made 40 people millionaires. How many people have you made successful? Do you invest in the people around you, or do you just see them as tools? Remember, the investment you make in people is the most profitable investment. The fourth law, wealth, ethics, and legacy, makes you immortal. Carnegie died, but his name lives on, because he used his fortune meaningfully. Money is a tool. What matters is what you build with that tool. What are you building? In this video, we examined Carnegie's steel laws. However, this is just the beginning. In our next archive entry, we will enter the world of Carnegie's greatest rival, and at the same time his greatest friend, John D. Rockefeller. We will see how he built his oil empire and turned money into a flow. The rise and fall of Standard Oil is a perfect case study for us to understand the anatomy of modern monopolies. However, before watching that video, think about which of these four laws of Carnegie is missing in your life. Ask yourself these questions. 1. Do I really feel hunger for knowledge, or am I just consuming entertainment content? 2. What am I doing to take control of the system I am in? 3. Am I developing the people around me, or am I using them? 4. Am I just spending the money I earn, or am I creating a legacy? The answers you give to these questions will determine where you will be 10 years from now. Carnegie asked these questions to himself when he was a 13-year-old immigrant boy, and he found the answers. Now it's your turn. Success leaves clues. We are just following those clues. Subscribe to Titan's Archive and take your place in the world of giants. The archive doors are closing for the next lesson. In the next entry, we will examine Rockefeller's absolute dominance in the oil world, his standard strategies. He was a much different leader than Carnegie. Much quieter, much more religious, but at the same time much more ruthless. Carnegie took control of steel. Rockefeller, on the other hand, oil. Both climbed the same peak through different paths. Which one was more successful? Whose strategies are more valid today? We will discover this together. A final note. Carnegie's favorite saying was, "Investing in knowledge pays the highest interest." He built his whole life on this principle, and at the end of his life he became one of the wisest people in the world. Wealth is temporary, but wisdom is permanent. Take care of yourself and remember, you too can be a Titan. All it takes is to learn the right principles and apply them. The archive is closing. Be ready for the next entry. Disclaimer. This video is created for educational and documentary purposes only. The audio and visual elements may be enhanced or generated using AI technology to bring the timeless wisdom of history's greatest figures to life. Titan's Archive has no official affiliation with the estates of the individuals featured. This is a dedicated project to preserve and analyze their legacy. Financial disclosure. The principles and strategies discussed are based on historical analysis and do not constitute financial, investment, or legal advice. Always perform your own due diligence before making any financial decisions.